Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm here today with Sally Dominguez, who is the author of Epic Resilience. Sally, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Will. Always good to have a chat.
So, Epic Resilience, which we need more than ever in today's world. Talk to me. Just first give us a little bit of a 1 minute sketch here on your background and tell us where you're coming from.
Huh. It's an interesting one because the old elevator pitch is difficult when you've done as many kind of wide-ranging things as me, but it's culminated in I'm generally a futurist. I've won a lot of awards for design. I've invented quite a few things. I've judged invention on TV. I judge cars for Car of the Year. But generally, these days, I teach an adventurous thinking strategy, which is like a proactive design thinking strategy. Teach at Stanford. I implement it at IKEA and Sony and various companies around the world. And I'm on faculty at Singularity University as a futurist and a specialist in exponential mindset. In a nutshell.
And for folks that are not familiar with Singularity University, tell us a little bit about that.
Singularity is such an interesting place. And, until a couple of years ago, I was not familiar with it. And I'm always interested in how many, power companies and C suite people talk about their interaction with Singularity and rave about Singularity. What it's done is it's an organization based in Silicon Valley, but really global. And it's assembled bleeding edge research and practitioners in exponential technologies. So it's all about exponential growth, exponential technologies, and of course the name Singularity is this ultimate conclusion that a lot of futurists believe will happen in our lifetimes perhaps, which is the coming together of human and machine. And so Singularity really focuses on 10x technologies, digital biology, robotics, deep learning, all sorts of things like that. My focus for Singularity is on how do we level up the human creative confidence and potential to face off against the kind of rational prediction and analysis that comes from artificial intelligence.
So let's talk about Epic Resilience. So Epic, EPIC, you got four quadrants.
Yes.
Talk to me about the framework, and let's dive in.
Yeah, so the EPIC stands for emotional, physical, intellectual, and creative resilience. And it's an interesting one because, I teach this kind of bearable discomfort thinking, moonshot thinking, using imagination and possibility. And what I find is when I teach what I teach, is that people love it. It's exhilarating, but it's physically and mentally exhausting. So before COVID, I'd already been thinking about how do I situate people to be at their best so that they can continue to think this way on the daily without burning out. But what was interesting, Will, was COVID came upon us. And I quickly realized that people were divided into two groups. There were the people that seized this opportunity, this lull or this moment to look at what they hadn't done, to focus on themselves, to maybe get really fit or discover new things. Um, but another 50% of the people kind of put on their pajamas, had a drink, and sat back waiting for someone else to bring it back to normal. And, because I deal in this whole exponential change thing, I'm like, there is no normal to go back to. This is now the digitization that was forced by COVID means every vertical is now disrupted. And as I looked around and realized how many people I knew and loved were feeling powerless and fearful, I realized that I should use my lull in time to write this book and to help people understand that resilience now, in this era of constant change, resilience is about not just surviving an event, because the event is a continuous change now, but thriving in chaos. And to survive, you need this mental and physical strength, but to thrive, you need to reignite curiosity and you need to understand the value of connection and idea sharing. And that's the intellectual and creative resilience. So I whipped this book out pretty quickly because I'd been thinking about it for so long. And I realized that, as you said in the intro, now more than ever, people need resilience.
So let's walk through some of your tips and let's walk through the quadrants. let's start with emotional. What are some tips that you share around how to be resilient emotionally?
Yeah, the other interesting thing about this strategy, the epic, is that it starts with individual, but the intent is that it scales to organizational and schooling and institutional. So each of these quadrants starts with us, but can expand. So emotional is about values, having purpose, being very clear about your boundaries that are based on your values and making them clear to other people. So being mentally stable as you can. And in fact, I use this. I have depression, and I came out of a situational depression using these boundaries, this value, this purpose to get more stable and kind of develop myself out of this period of like unhealthiness. It's just part of what I have, but it's a really interesting one. And at an organizational level, again, this idea of purpose, uniting people, and of having really clear, transparent boundaries is super important. So it starts with this idea of what are your values, what's your purpose, how do we protect that with significant communicatable boundaries. And then moving into physical, that's about strength. So, from an individual point of view, it's understanding the strength you have and exploring that very direct body mind connection. So particularly, I talk about in the book, I began to box, and I've always been a strong, physically strong person. I'm pretty built, however, when I hit the heavy bag, I feel this power that I think if everybody felt the power that they have within them when they hit the heavy bag, they'd immediately feel more confident mentally. So physical is about, getting enough sleep, looking at your nutrition, understanding your sugar intake, taking charge of as many parts. It's essentially being self-aware, right? Taking control of your physicality and your strength and enhancing it.
Okay.
So that the emotional and the physical come together to be that survival,
Okay.
right?
So,
So
so let me just jump in here.
leveling
So,
up.
so on the emotional piece, so I understand kind of the high level, where we should be headed. Your point around identifying your values and your purpose. What are some let's say some a listener saying, well, that's great, okay, but practically, how do I get there? So, what are
Yeah.
some tips that you have that are very actionable to start on that journey towards getting clarity on your values, getting clarity on your purpose?
That that's a great
Is it like a
question because
daily journaling thing, or a
uh,
meditation or mindfulness, or what are some of your suggestions around that?
yeah, I would start really with values, and I do a lot of coaching in vision-based strategy, and it all comes back to this. What are your values? Like, as an example, for me, truth is really important to me. If I find that someone is consistently lying to me about things, it's just something I can't tolerate. And I'd not really stopped, paused, and realized how important that was to me. I mean, everybody listening might go, "Well, yeah, truth's important," but if I was to list a set of values, like if you sit down, in the book I talk about seven, but say you start with three things, values that are really important. They might be trust. They might be. A friend of mine said fiscal values are really important to her, which I was interested in. So for me, it's trust. So once you understand a value that you feel really strongly about, then think about, push out from that and go, what won't I tolerate? Like if this is my value, where are my limits? You know, is it, and so in my case, it's, if people present with a history of not telling the truth and not acting in a truthful way towards me, I have to get them out of my life until, I'll make that really clear. I'll be very clear about what that boundary is. So once you've worked out what this value is and you understand your limits, you want to write down what those boundaries are and you want to communicate them to family, to friends, to work colleagues, so that no one can misunderstand where you're coming from. So you want to be really clear. I will not tolerate a pattern of lying. And if you lie to me continuously, I cannot have anything to do with you until that pattern changes.
Yeah.
Like, and this is so strengthening. I think kids should learn this at school because it's taken me until the age of 48 to understand how liberating a boundary is. Because once you have these values spelt out, all the superfluous stuff falls away. You really, and as an organization also, once you have a value statement and a purpose that you're working towards, it's really easy to see what is relevant and what isn't.
Hmm.
Personally, it's really easy to see what's relevant and what isn't, and who's relevant and who isn't.
I wonder if there's an exercise around, identifying your sort of aspirational values that
Mm.
that you sort of would tell someone if someone asks you what are your values. So there's some exercise around doing that, but then also, if we think that our values are represented in our calendar and the way we actually spend our time, some current state assessment of if someone actually looks at my calendar, what would they deduce what my values actually are in practice? So we might say, like, oh, well, I really value being a great dad and spending time with my kids, and I value being physically fit. But then if you actually looked at it and said, okay, well, how much time have you spent with your kids over the last month? Did you
That's it.
read to them at night? Oh, well,
Yeah,
did you watch movies, play games with them, or whatever? Or you're fit. Okay, you want to be physically fit. How many times have you worked out? Then there's sort of a current state of actual expression of our values of the, versus our aspirational values of what we'd like to get to.
yeah.
So, any reactions to that?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, fundamental human motivation revolves around competency and authenticity. We all want to feel like we're authentic and we're empowered by that. And so if you have a mismatch between your aspirational values and your reality, resilience is about you taking control and bringing those two things together in filling that gap. Because if you say, look at my calendar and look at my reality, and yeah, I wanted to spend this time with the kids, or I wanted to spend this time, let's use the fitness one. I wanted to get physically fit, but I just don't have time. So, so you may think you don't have time, but the people that I've coached through this, I've said to them, you know what? You don't have to go somewhere and work out for an hour. Literally get out of bed and run for 5 minutes in one direction, then turn around and run back. That's all you have to do. Do that every single day. We're talking about 10 minutes. Everybody has it. And if you prioritize, get out of bed, roll out, have all your stuff ready, run for 5 minutes, literally set your timer. A ton of people who work out all the time might laugh at that. But that 5 minutes and 5 minute run back is going to make a massive difference, not only to your physical health, but to your ability to structure and to your feeling of authenticity. So it's not a matter of, yeah, drop everything, I've got to radically restructure. It's literally taking tiny 5 to 15 minute bites and bringing those aspirational values much closer to your actual daily life. It's not rocket science and it's not difficult.
Another thing that I've seen and found successful in my own life around the emotional piece is having some kind of journaling practice.
Mm,
The morning pages that Julia Cameron helped popularize and invented. It's just totally unstructured stream of consciousness writing, kind of first thing in the morning. Kind of can help a person connect with what's going on in their life, and surprising things come out.
yeah.
What other sorts of real practical tips would you suggest for someone who wants to, beyond journaling, beyond, who wants to
Your
explore that
classic
emotional resonance?
gratitude journal.
Yeah, yeah.
It's interesting. I was at a talk with an expert in this idea of fulfillment, human fulfillment. And he was talking about, everybody always says that the gratitude journal, that write down 3 things you're grateful for, um, is the top of the pyramid in terms of what you can do for yourself. This guy said no. There's one thing that's higher than that, which is lucky because I will say, whilst I'm all for a gratitude journal, Australians just don't do that as well as Americans do. We kind of scoff at it, which is a shame. And the longer I live here, the less I scoff. But this guy said more important than writing down what you're grateful for is connecting with other people, is reaching out to other people and having human connection. And that's actually a key part of this epic resilience strategy. The idea is it's put on your own oxygen mask first. So level yourself up, balance yourself before you reach out, but to then use the ripple effect to outreach to 3 people every day, ideally, and not with an intent, not with a networking thing in mind, but literally connect with people and share an idea, or just connect with people and check in. And it is true that as I worked through, I had a heap of therapy and all this other stuff to get out of this situational depression after this massive event that happened to me. Um, this idea of outreach is the most uplifting thing. And it reminds you again of your authentic self. And I think that paired with, if we're going to talk about emotional also, this idea of purpose, harder for younger people, I think, easier once you've hit 30 and beyond, perhaps. And that is, if I died tomorrow, what is the legacy I wish I'd left? Apart from I've got great kids or I've got a great life or whatever it is. What is the legacy? If you wanted to leave with impact, what is it? And, for me, I realized that it was, I want to inspire and activate creative confidence in others because I want to spread optimism. Right. And so everything I do filters down from that. Does this end up fulfilling that purpose? No, I won't do it. Yes, I'll do it. Right? Does this podcast help? Yes, it does, because it'll get more people thinking. So, and I think if you look at reaching out and forcing yourself to connect with people, combined with thinking about what you wish your legacy was, your purpose, and then using that to guide you, all this superfluous stuff, caring what other people think, worrying about things you can't control, falls away because you had this focus and you had this purpose and it's bigger than yourself. And I think this is something that post-COVID people are talking about a lot. There's a lot of experts talking about the importance of human connection and the importance of having an aspiration that's greater than just yourself. What can you do to make things better for everybody? Sounds a bit woo-woo, doesn't it? But
no, not at all. I really strongly agree with that, Sally. A friend of mine a couple weeks ago sent me a link to a podcast on the art of manliness, and it was an interview back in December 2020 with an expert in loneliness and an expert on suicide, and it was about a very high prevalence of male suicide. And the friend sent it to me because a friend of his from college had committed suicide, and that episode really brought it home. And that got me thinking that to do more, just like reaching out to people that I know. And to your point about emotional resilience, it's not just for yourself, but also sometimes reaching out to people that maybe from way back can help them out, but it's also really powerful, just that connection. And as a result of that, I said, oh yeah, I should do more of that. I reached out to a few friends of mine, and I just this past Sunday, I caught up with a friend of mine from my Navy days, who I've only spoken with a few times since I left the service in the 90s, and we had a great conversation. And it was just, so I just, the rest of the day, I just felt so great after, catching up with my friend.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's so simple and it's fundamental. I mean, we release certain chemicals when we're in physical contact with people. We release other chemicals in our brain when we're connecting with other people. It's something that has been undervalued. And I do believe that this unique period in history where people have been locked down and denied physical contact, and a lot of people were so scared that they retracted from even reaching out remotely. You were realizing how important it is. And you look at, in the Bay Area alone, teenage suicide rate has increased by around 40%, which is incredibly scary.
Oh, that's awful.
Teenage eating disorders are up 35%, UCSF reports, because these poor kids feel out of control. They no longer have the connection they had. And I mean, you could argue that they're still on social media, but that's a different way of connecting, And I think that what will come of this is a huge amount of research will go into how we reignite that kind of connection, not just for gain, not just for networking, but it is actually helping each other. It's a bit like that mentor relationship where all the mentors always say, I've always said this too, I learn as much as they learn from me.
Yeah.
In just reaching out, you had your chat with your old mate that you haven't spoken to for ages. It's idea sharing, it's experience sharing, and it's invigorating.
So message on this segment is, think of a friend from high school, from college, you haven't talked to in a while, and just reach out. They may really need that call from you and you'll enjoy it. Let's go on to physical. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So how, some of the things are obvious, like get more sleep, drink more water, do some push-ups or go out for a walk. What are some of your tips in the book on like really how to implement these things and make them happen beyond just like, well, obviously I should floss and I should, work out and I should stretch and I should, eat less sugar and I should, eat more vegetables. How do people
Yeah.
actually implement
The
this
sugar
stuff?
one is pretty interesting. I
Yeah.
would challenge, if people just literally for 2 days count the amount of added sugar you're eating. Because, I've got at the back of the book some of the studies that relate brain activity and brain function to oversugaring or lack of brain function to sugaring. And then I just watched a fantastic documentary yesterday. What was that thing called? It was so good. Fast leveling up. Oh, don't know what it was. Don't have it in front of me. But was talking about how lack of sleep. There was a Surgeon General of the Army talking about how she had researched that a lack of sleep over 2 days was the equivalent to fighting while drunk. And she implemented this program in around 2015 that very specifically targeted troops on the front line and ensured that they got more sleep, and the rate of accidents dropped dramatically. So even though we've heard it before, you need sleep, we've heard it before, don't eat sugar. Actually, these two elements have a huge action on your brain function. And, I think we just take for granted that everything has sugar in it. But, when I started counting how much sugar I was eating from added sugar, I was horrified. And I'm a pretty low sugar person. And so if people just start with 2 days, just every time you eat something, check out how much added sugar there is, add it up, and remember that the World Health Organization would suggest you have no more than 30 grams. Have a look at what you have, and you're probably closer to 70, which means your brain is not operating at peak function.
Yeah.
So fix it. But the other thing about the strength is, for me, it's about, and again, I'll say women, but it can also be men that aren't your classic jock. And it's about understanding your strength. So cardio, fitness, all of that stuff, that's great. Do it. But what I want people to do is feel how strong they actually are, what their body is capable of by lifting something super heavy, but in the right way, by doing deep squats on those huge leg muscles. And once you start realizing that, you may be doing just Pilates, you may be doing just yoga, and that's fantastic for your body. But this idea of understanding your potential strength is really important, because that goes to your mind strength. So even though it's all fitness, I'm suggesting like do some really deep squats or do something that actually activates muscles and reminds you, or punch something really hard. I mean, the women that come and hit my heavy bag with me always start punching like kittens. And I'm like, you actually need to put some meaning into that. And as soon as they do, they're like, yeah. And it's not about aggression. This is about literally understanding the power your body has and what that can manifest as.
And for
Important.
someone who doesn't have access to a gym, what's your thoughts about what we can do at home? Do some
It's a
push-ups, do
funny
some
one. Like one of
sit-ups. What?
my one of my examples was, squat really low, straighten up your back and pick up a chair. Like lift a squat down holding a chair, or squat down holding a couple of cans. Doesn't really matter. Just pick something up, do a deep squat, and understand what you're capable of. And if you're impaired, like if you don't have functional legs, say, if you don't have functional arms, there are still ways to use what limbs you can control to feel your own strength, whether it's clenching, whether it's lifting. Find something around the house, settle yourself in, and empower yourself. Like just understand, like you look at something you think you couldn't lift, you usually can lift that thing. And
Okay.
it's just that idea of reminding ourselves. We've all got very comfortable. We're comfy on the couch. We're comfy sitting back and, slumping over. But actually, our bodies are busting to be optimized and deliver to us this incredible strength that we have, these abilities that we have that kind of we've softened.
The next quadrant after E, emotional and physical, I think is intellectual, right? Talk to
So,
me.
so the emotional and physical are making you a stable, giving you a stable base, right? But the intellectual and creative are about growth mindset. So this idea that with tools and with effort, you can develop both your curiosity, your intellectual abilities, and your creative thinking and your idea sharing. And these are the ones that are as much about outreach as they are about personal development. These are the ones that are about flourishing and thriving in change and chaos, and being able to spot opportunity where other people see chaos and fear. So intellectual resilience is about understanding that we use our expert brain every day. That's where our neural pathways tend to be wired towards what we know. We do it over and over again. That's how we got our job. That's how we made it through school, right? That's rational knowledge. That's only one of many intelligences. And so where I start on intellectual resilience is read some cutting edge piece of research every day. I subscribe to a newsletter called Science X, but I also read a ton of research and development and MIT and Harvard labs. And you basically read something that is pointy edge, brand new technology that you don't understand for 2 to 3 minutes, and then think about what you do every day and force your brain to make a connection, which won't be easy because there won't be one. But what you're doing is forcing your brain to think outside what it knows and scrape around in the area of possibility and imagination.
Okay, give me an
So if
example. Give me an example.
Okay, so say you're in the business, say, of bringing consultants together, talking about private consulting practice, say, and I say to you, hey, here is this 2 minute video. I've actually developed a whole lot of little videos around this. Here's a 2 minute video on this tiny robot that prints itself and then folds itself up and then walks off the table. And a whole lot of these things can go out and do these kind of mass robot tasks, even though each one's super simple. Completely autonomous, off they go. They're programmed, the circuit's printed, it folds up and it walks away. So I tell you about that, right? I let you watch the video, you look at it and go, that's crazy, of course. And then I say, all right, so think about what you do every day, and I want you to bring that robot into what you do every day. How could that process or how could that thing be a part of what you do every day? I mean, you tell me, how could it?
Well, it gets me thinking about. It gets me thinking about robotic process automation, about the idea of robots and consulting practice. Maybe not necessarily a physical robot, but robotic process automation, which to automate certain tasks, like creation of PowerPoint pages, creation of invoices, creation of other back office processes, paying bills, reminders to reach out to clients, reminders, things, if there's things that could be standardized and routinized, like if you're preparing for a kickoff meeting or if you're preparing a proposal, how could you use robots in terms of online robots to do
Yeah.
some of those tasks for you? So
Or could you send this little guy out to people as a potential, as a virtual calling card, and when they put it on the printer, when they print out what you sent them, it folds up and walks over to them.
that would be pretty cool. And then maybe we could draw
Right. So
draw a 2 by 2 matrix for them, and
there it is. So the thing is, what you find is when I give you that bit of information that's outside your scope of expertise, you start asking yourself questions. And we don't tend to ask ourselves questions as much as we should. So our curiosity is kind of damped, but it's always there. The human brain has it. And by forcing yourself to look at a piece of information that has no relevance to what you're doing, and then understand, you don't have to understand it even, then forcing yourself to develop an unexpected connection back to your expertise. And unexpected connections are the base of all innovation. Is this incredible, unique human ability to make unexpected connections from possibility to reality.
and then do you
What you're
encourage
doing is developing the habit of questioning.
And do you encourage people to keep some kind of log of these, connections? Like what was the
It's a
article?
process, so
Yeah.
you could if you wanted to. But for me, it's not about the end game. It's about the process and developing the habit of questioning and questioning and questioning and seeking out unrelated knowledge, because that will then start provoking your curiosity back into an active part of your everyday. And once you've got curiosity as an active part of your everyday, you're going to come up with more out of the box solutions, more thinking. You're going to feel more alive. It's funny. I just I finished a long coaching session with 30 of Sony Corporation's future leaders. So from all over the world, they picked 30 people. I coached them for 3 months on vision thinking and this kind of moonshot stuff. And at the end of it, this engineer who was like 42, I think, incredibly technically gifted at whatever he did, picked as a future leader, but very conservative. And he said in the debrief, he goes, I have fundamentally changed the way I think every day because of this moonshot thinking. He said, I never thought it was possible to be anything but the person I was born to be, which was, I was born with this very analytical brain. I'm really good at looking at engineering and solving problems. But he said, my workmates and my family both have commented on the change. And he said, I feel 20 years younger. And I couldn't believe it. I was so happy because what he's telling me is his brain feels so alive. He feels so invigorated. And it's simply because we developed over these 3 months the habit of every single day thinking in the realm of possibility thinking and developing this intellectual and creative resilience in addition to him being an expert every day. Like, it makes a massive difference to your confidence and your resilience, your ability to just thrive in any situation by piquing this curiosity that we all have, but it's kind of buried.
Okay, so one kind of take home practical idea here is read some scientific article or something that's very outside your normal day to day, and think about how you might apply that to your own
Yeah.
practice, your own business.
Have it come into your inbox. Just lands in the morning like my Science X newsletter. I open it. I read the first thing I see. I go, whoa, I don't even understand this carbon capture thing. And then I read it, and then I think about it for another 5. And like ask myself the questions that need to be asked,
Yeah. I'd build on that. Like, I think another experiment to consider, which I've been kind of doing myself, is I stopped. I've been taking a news diet since mid-January, and Tim Ferriss talks about this in the 4-Hour Work Week, and
Yeah.
it's a common idea to just really shut down all reading of just sort of news sources, right? And for me,
Yeah.
I cut out Twitter as well because I was spending like way too much time just doom scrolling
Yep.
on Twitter. And you might say, oh my goodness, how are you going to find out about what's going on in the world? Well, I think it gets much more interesting if you say, well, I'm not going to read the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Economist, but I still want to find out what's going on in the world. You get a little bit more perhaps creative about how you go about it. Maybe I'll read just Wikipedia articles, or
Yeah.
which, by the way, often I find are just give much more context than reading the latest article about some conflict where you just get this very thin slice. Or let's say reading academic articles or reading takes from sort of blogs or some
Yep.
Substack
Patents.
writers.
Sometimes I read patents just for fun.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter what you read because what you're looking for is what's brand new. What are people doing? What are people discovering?
Yeah.
And that's making you think like a pioneer. Like, Deepak Chopra says, every time you go to do the same thing, ask yourself, do you want to be a pioneer of the future?
Yeah. And
Do you
instead
want to be
of
safe, or do you want to pioneer the good stuff?
instead of delegating to the editor of the New York Times or of the Washington Post what is important in the world, of making that decision yourself, and maybe you go to the Department of Health and Human Services and read like the latest government report on something, or going to a think tank that you respect or maybe that you don't respect and trying to get a contrary point of view.
Absolutely.
But just exposing yourself to like just very different sources of information
Yeah.
to get out of the ordinary. So
I love that because
yeah,
we're so curated. I mean, everything on Google or whatever search engine we're doing is based on what we've looked for before, what our region is, what our language is, what our preferences are. It's so curated that, as a journalist, I tend to go to page 6 and beyond when I'm Googling something because I'm not looking at the stuff that's paid to be in front of me. I refuse. But we have to be self-aware enough to know that's happening.
yeah, and let's talk about the last quadrant, the C. So
My favorite thing.
yeah,
Yes.
so
So it's so funny. So often people think of creativity in terms of artistry instead of realizing that creative thinking is possibility thinking. It's massive imagination. And yeah, perhaps you're an artist and perhaps that's your way of expressing creative thinking, but it's nothing to do with the craft of painting or sculpting. Nothing. It's about using your mind, using your imagination to solve issues or consider issues. And so, for me, the big takeaway for creative resilience, to give yourself confidence and to spread this kind of optimism to others is idea sharing. I mean, we're in a country, the USA is not, it's very much about protect your ideas, patent it, wrap it up in legals. Everything I've invented, I haven't. I've done it 1 or 2 patents, but I generally let them go because I thought, I'm capable of inventing so much more stuff. And yeah, I'll protect it to the extent that I can license it, but I don't want to protect it to the extent that no one can pick up these innovations and run with them because, you know, every time I invented something, it tended to be something that was useful. So I think this idea of don't hang on to one idea and think it's so important. Understand that if you share ideas with people, you discuss ideas with people, you will be prolific in generating new ideas. It's this beautiful thing where Maya Angelou says you cannot use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. So it's not an expendable resource. It's actually one that is ignited by sharing and discussing and exploring. And I think that's what's so exciting because also when you idea share, it's completely inclusive. If we're idea sharing, we're way outside knowledge. And knowledge in its many guises is something that can create exclusion, expertise. And if you fall outside that, you're not counted or, schooling or whatever. But imagination, every human has it. And everybody's ideas are valid. And I think a really important part of creative confidence and resilience is that everybody is included when you idea share. And I love that.
I gotta ask about share with us one of your patents that you've earned.
Okay, so way back, I was an architect. I was doing a lot of sustainable building in Australia. We had massive drought, huge water restrictions, very relevant for California right now. I designed a water tank called the Rainwater Hog. It was to be like a Lego block you filled up with water. It was modular. It was very slim. So it was going to be a tall rectangle. When I went to the factory, rotomolding factory, and I said, hey, I want to make this tall rectangle. They started laughing and they said, you don't know anything about holding water. The head of water means the bottom will bulge. That will never work. And I said, yeah, well, what I'm thinking is if I put kind of donut holes, I was thinking of a donut. And I said, if I put holes from side to side on this tank, then the walls of those holes are like inside out bracing and they're going to hold the walls together. And they went, nah, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, I did it. And there's now a whole genre of slimline rainwater tank called Slim, which uses these through holes as the only way they can exist as the bracing. And I actually invented that structure. Yeah.
That is fantastic. I'm so glad I asked about that. That's really cool. I will have to include a link to some images of those in the show notes.
Yeah.
So Sally, we will include a link to Epic Resilience here in the show notes. Where else should people go if they want to find out more about your varied practice?
Well, my website, sallydominguez.com, kind of has links to everything on it. My adventurous thinking strategy, I'm not running it at Stanford this semester, but I do from time to time run it there. LinkedIn is good because I put everything up there. But really, I'm excited for people this is a short book. It's very deliberately very to the point. I've put all my favorite quotes in there because I think another part of keeping ourselves on the right path is to surround ourselves with thoughts from people who really say it so much better than I can. So I've got a whole section of like inspirational quote things that go in with what I'm talking about. I think my website and hopefully there's a lot of information in the book that will help not only people but also organizations get more innovative, get more resilient, and be more inclusive. And it's rolling out as an education strategy this year, which I'm excited about.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, Sally, thank you so much for joining. We'll include those links in the show notes. And listeners, do check out Epic Resilience. Drop a review on Amazon or your favorite bookseller. And let me know if you have questions for me that you'd like me to answer on a future episode. And as a reminder, if you go to umbrex.com and click on the Unleash tab, you can sign up for the weekly email that I send out with a quick summary of each episode and some bonus material. So thank you for listening.